It was nerve-wracking. I'm thankful that I lived to tell, right? I'm thankful that I have this story. It changed my life directly because you kind of get a second chance.
This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Now I want to come back to you, Katrina. Can you kind of, like, in a 30-second recap, just explain where you were on 9/11 and what your job was and what was going on?
Yes. Sure. So I was a New York-based flight attendant. I worked a flight on 9/10 to San Francisco, from JFK to San Francisco. I was a purser of the crew, so I was in charge of the in-flight crew. And we were laying over at our crew hotel in San Francisco, and I was awakened by my now husband, then boyfriend, to tell me to turn on the TV. He was in the East Coast. I was in the West, still sleeping. And that's how I found out. That's how I learned. And then...
Was that about 6 in the morning California time when he called you?
Yeah, 6 in the morning Cali time, yeah. And then my phone was blowing up. You know, back then, we didn't have the same technology we have now, but I started getting all the calls. People, you know, worried, knew that I was a flight attendant, all the family members, all the loved ones, people I hadn't talked to in years. At some point, every crew member was in my room, and we were watching all of this unfold live in front of our eyes. All of us were just completely and totally shocked and mortified. Yeah. There were tears. You know, it was all the feelings. And so...
Did you know any of the crew and flight attendants?
I knew some of them vaguely, not very close, though. But still, it was very impactful. It was one of those things where we're all a sisterhood and a brotherhood in the sky. And so it could have been any of us, right?
Chances are you probably knew some of them, or at least maybe had flown with some of them at one point or another, right? Yeah.
At the time, it was the largest airline, and we were flying with mixed crews all the time. So very possible that I passed one of them in flight or was on a plane with one of them. So some of the names were familiar. And so I was a commuter. I was actually commuting to New York from Orlando at the time. But a lot of my crew members were New Yorkers. So that was their home. So I had a crash pad in Queens that I stayed at when I was there. So we were in San Francisco, and there was a ground stop. We couldn't go anywhere. There were no planes in the sky. And we were supposed to return back to New York on the 11th, but because of the ground stop, of course, we were there until the 13th in San Francisco, and we were the very, very first crew. We were the very first plane. I was on the first plane that took off after 9/11. It was just crew. We were repositioning crew members.
I bet you were so happy there was not a single passenger on that plane, right?
It was surreal. It was surreal, Patrick, because we were flying out of San Fran, and you know how busy that airport is. Yeah. And there was not a single passenger in the entire airport.
Wow.
It was
eerie.
like a scene out of an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. We had an inter-office mail, anything sharp in our suitcases or carry-on bags. So we were sending corkscrews that we kept on hand, to open wine bottles, first class. We were sending back scissors, clippers, anything. We had to put these in these little mail envelopes that they were going to mail back to our domicile where we were based, to New York. So we get on the plane. We're all holding hands. It's just us in the waiting area. We're all holding hands. We're in this big, DC-10, and we're crying because it was so emotional, And
I can only imagine.
What we did is we were the repositioning plane. Okay, so we started in San Fran. We went to Denver, and each flight got busier and busier.
So you were picking up stranded crew members who couldn't get home.
We were picking up crews, and we also had some passengers. So in Denver, we had passengers and crew. And then we ended up in Chicago. And, Patrick, we couldn't fly back to New York. It was closed. So when we got to Chicago, there were no rental cars. Of course, you couldn't fly into New York. And so all of my crew members that were actually New Yorkers and lived there were scrambling, trying to figure out how to get home. Yeah. And I eventually, we laid over in Chicago, and I eventually was able to get back to Orlando, to Florida.
What was it like, Katrina, when passengers began maybe more regularly getting back to regular flights resuming? What was it like for you as a flight attendant, knowing that it was passengers who rose up and took down these planes? What was it like for you as a crew member now, wondering if it would happen again? Did you ever wonder that? Were you ever fearful? Did you ever look with suspicion at somebody like, that guy doesn't look right?
Yeah, of course. And a lot of prayer. I just remember every time I hit the jetway, every time I went to the airport and walked down that jetway, every single thing changed for us. Everything. Yeah. Everything changed overnight. Every single time we went to work, we had a different change that was being made. They would print out papers with updates and put them in our folders or like little files at work where we were based. Okay. And it would be like every single thing changed. The way we looked at passengers changed. The way we felt on the plane changed. The way we did our service changed. What we could and couldn't have, on board. Everything went to, plastic cutlery, right? Because you couldn't have anything sharp on a plane. It was the most basic changes that affected our daily living. A lot of my crew members, a lot of my dear friends, they had tremendous PTSD. They took months and months off for leave. Shortly thereafter, that's when they started offering furloughs because we were hemorrhaging money, too, on top of everything else, It was very traumatic. The bond was incredible. It was beautiful to see the country pull together so beautifully, and all our crew members, the way that we looked out for each other. We all shared that pain. We all shared those same feelings. So you almost had that kind of deeper bond with the people that you worked with. And I think that the passengers, too, there was a lot of fear with people taking planes again.
I was one of them. I'm a grown man and I was a frequent flyer and I never had any issues, but I was afraid to get on a, commercial airliner. I was afraid and I canceled flights and I drove everywhere for the first few months. And then when it just utterly impractical to do that, I remember how fearful I was when I had to get back on a commercial flight because tell me if you remember feeling this way, but wasn't it true that everybody was wondering, are there other like sleeper groups out there? The second wave is going to hit, and what would you do if it happened on your flight? I remember a pilot coming on, maybe it was that first flight I was on, I don't remember exactly, but it was early in on it. And he said, if you're worried, he's speaking to the passengers over the loudspeaker, if you're worried about another hijacking, don't worry because we have things we can do in the cockpit to make it very difficult for that to happen again. He didn't say what they were, but I found that reassuring because he acknowledged our fear.
We changed a lot.
Yeah,
exactly. We changed a lot of our security measures as far as entry into the cockpit. I remember before 9/11, I remember being on a flight once with a group of kids. We were chartering a plane, and I remember the cockpit, the pilot, like the captain, left the door open during the flight. That never happened again.
That would never happen.
There were just so many changes, and just even how many changes did we even see in security? Right, just going
Right.
But
you got to take your shoes off now. Got to take your belt off now. That was so laughable when it first started. I remember thinking, what on earth? But I guess it made sense after a while.
Yeah, it really was overnight, dramatic, drastic, devastating. Impactful change. Every day there was a new change at work. So every time I came to work during that season, every single time I had a trip, my job description changed. What I was doing changed. What I had to do differently changed.
Did the airline ever say, listen, if a passenger looks like he might be starting a hijacking, here are the things you do? Throw boiling water at him, or, did you get directives like that? Did the flight crew, were they taught what to do if somebody looked like he was going to start up?
Yes, we did. And we did have, different things that we were supposed to do if somebody looked suspicious and different ways to
code words
deal with it. I think when you're up there, 35,000 feet, right, you're kind of on your own.
Yeah.
And so you have to, I think that if push came to shove, I think everybody was all of our emotions were so heightened. I remember when people board planes, I just remember the looks on everybody's faces and how they would look around, notice their neighbors.
Look at each other.
Be oblivious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, be really keenly aware of what's happening, be more affected by noises or things that people did. Mm-hmm. It was just much more of a hyper-aware of everything that was happening and noticing people going into the lavatories and noticing the way people are looking at each other. And
even as a passenger, seeing any passenger approach the cockpit door was alarming for the longest time. To walk up, because the lavatories are up there on many planes. Even that alone was alarming, I remember.
Yeah, it was nerve-wracking. I'm thankful that I lived to tell, right? I'm thankful that I have this story. It changed my life directly because you kind of get a second chance, right? Mm-hmm. Especially since we were one day later on the same exact aircraft coming from the same base.
It could have been me. You.
And I felt like, God, I need to do something, right? I need to make good on this. So I'm very active in pro-life work now.
What did your faith do for you, mean for you, help you? What dimension did your Catholic faith and love for Jesus play I mean, it's kind of a loaded question. I think I know the answer, but for you personally, what was it like to be a follower of Jesus in the immediate aftermath of 9/11?
Well, I think it meant for me that I needed to be that light for others. It was so dark, right? It was so hard.
Yeah.
And so I leaned into Jesus and Mother Mary. I think I almost had a reversion, honestly, during that season where I became closer in my faith and really intentional in asking God what he wanted me to do and thanking him, just being so incredibly thankful for this life that I was blessed to have, but yet hurting so deeply, so deeply for all those who had lost their lives, and to continue to spread that joy and hope.
I'll bet the passengers and your fellow crew members who saw that dimension of your life were comforted by that, Katrina. I have no doubt. Thank you for being so generous with your time. God bless you. You can join me by listening to The Patrick Madrid Show on the Relevant Radio app, live each weekday at 8 to 11 a.m. And thanks for listening.